Hello book lovers and welcome back or welcome to Nat Cat's Bookish Cafe. Today I will be doing a intimidating book video. So I recently watched Prue's Project doing this video, and I'm thinking she's the creator because she didn't mention anyone else. So all of these prompts are based off of her video, which I have gone ahead and linked down below. So I'm going to try and do this video based off of the books that I have on my shelves. I don't have too many super long books, which are definitely the ones that I find the most intimidating, but I also have a few books on here where maybe the content of the story or the hype that I've heard around the story is what's making it more intimidating to me. So I think there's about 9 or 10 prompts for this, and I will go ahead and jump right in. So the first prompt is a book that you just haven't been able to finish. And I only have one book for this, but it's been with me for quite a while. I believe I started reading it in either June or July. This book was present in the first vlog that I made for this YouTube channel, and that is The Damning Stone by TJ Klune. So you can see that this is about as far as I got, so almost to the halfway point, but not quite. This is part of his Tales of Verania series, which I have thoroughly enjoyed. This is kind of a continuation. It takes place after all of these events, but we are actually following Prince Justin. So we're following a different character. This book, the reason I can't finish it, very much has to do with the timing and some of the tropes that are in this story. So in the story, Prince Justin kind of wants to find someone that he can love. You know, he wants to make his own choices and things like that because his father had once told him that if he didn't marry someone by a certain time that he would just choose someone. So he puts a lot of value in being able to find his own someone else. And then a prince from another kingdom kind of shows up and says that they have to get married. You know, it's one of those like forced marriage situations. And I actually started this book the day after Roe versus Wade got overturned, in which a lot of people in our country suddenly lost the ability to make very important choices for themselves, and to watch Prince Justin have his choices taken away, and to know that the situation that he and his friends and his kingdom are in is actually rather dangerous and could cause a lot of harm to them, was just too close to what was happening politically in our country. And so I had to put it down. I think in like August or so I tried to pick it up again, but even the thought of doing it caused a little bit of anxiety, so I'm not quite there yet. I am hoping to one day finish this because I want to read all of TJ Klune's books. I kind of made a goal with myself that if I do not finish this book by the end of the year, I will just read the ending of the story, because I know the story is gonna have a happy ending. Okay, he's gonna be in love with that prince, and you know, everything is gonna be fine. I know that. It's just getting through the parts where everything is not fine that I just can't handle right now. So the rest of these questions all start out with I haven't read this book because, and the first one is because I haven't had the time. So I selected 2 books for this. One is a nonfiction and the other is a fiction. Really, for like any of the nonfiction I own, you could say I haven't read it because I haven't had the time. But the one I just decided to choose is Evicted because I actually put this on my fall TBR, but then Chanel Miller's Know My Name ended up taking about 4 months to read, so I haven't gotten around to being able to pick up another nonfiction physical story since then, but I am planning on finishing Know My Name this month, and I'll hopefully actually be able to get to this one. We'll see. In March, I have some pretty set plans for my reading, so this may actually have to wait until April because I may not even have time to read it then. For the fiction story, I have A Lesson in Vengeance by Victoria Lee. I read her The Fever King duology last year and really enjoyed it and picked this book up shortly after, but I just haven't been able to get it on my TBR and just haven't had the time to add additional books to my TBR, and therefore I haven't been able to read this. I am rather excited to get to it because I really did enjoy that duology. However, I haven't heard the greatest things about this book, so that's another reason it's a little bit intimidating, just because it sounds like a really interesting concept. We're following a woman or a young girl at a kind of private academy, and it includes like witches and research, so it's kind of dark academia vibes, but it seems that per most reviewers it just doesn't quite hit the mark, so I am a little nervous to get into it and be disappointed by an author that I have enjoyed in the past. And the next prompt is I haven't read this book yet because it is a sequel, and I only have one book for this, and that is Aristotle and Dante Dive into the Waters of the World by Benjamin Alir Sayens. I apologize, I always feel like I say that part of his name wrong. But this is the second book to Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe. This was one of my favorite books for a couple years, and then at the beginning of 2022 I actually reread it to prepare for the second book and ended up not quite enjoying my reread as much, and therefore I never really prioritized reading the second book in the duology. I mean, it is still a book I'm very much interested in. There's a couple reasons I'm intimidated. One, I'm just worried that at this point it has been about a year since I read the first book, so I'm not as connected to the characters. I also was a little iffy about the author's writing the last time I wrote it or read it, so I'm a little worried that I won't like the writing as much. I mean, it has been a few years since he came out with the first book, so obviously I'm sure his writing has changed and developed over the years. And also, I believe this book does touch on topics of like the AIDS pandemic, and that's always a very difficult topic for me to read about. So I just know that this book will probably be rather emotional for me. Hoping to get to it soon, very soon actually, but it's definitely been sitting there and, you know, scaring me a little to get to it, but I haven't really heard anything about it either, so it's kind of hard for me to, you know, if I've been hearing nothing but positive things about it, I'd be more excited, but it's just, it kind of came out as like an unexpected sequel, and honestly, just haven't heard anything about it. So the next prompt is I haven't read this yet because it's new. So I have two books on here. The first one is Babel by R.F. Kuang. This book is intimidating for a plethora of reasons, but it is also relatively new to my shelves. I purchased this knowing that I was not going to read it anytime soon, so I don't feel too bad about not having read it. This book deals heavily with translation and academia and colonization, and I've heard nothing but wonderful things about this, so there is a lot of hype around this book as well. It's a chonker. It's probably gonna be a pretty dense read as well. Like I said, I'm probably not gonna read it probably even anytime this year, but it is a book that I hope to get to eventually because it is definitely a topic that intrigues me. Just for now, the topic and the themes of the story are just a little too intimidating for me, and I need to build up a little bit of courage before I get to it. The next book we have is actually an anthology that's connected to a series that I really enjoyed, and that is Gleanings by Neil Schusterman. I believe they said I've heard a few people say that there's actually other authors that write a few stories in here. But this builds off of the Scythe series, which I read a few years ago and really enjoyed. I'm a little worried that I've been away from this world too long. I think I read Toll back in 2021, so it hasn't like really been that long, but you know, still long enough for me to maybe not be able to recognize the world as much or the characters as much. But I'm still really excited to be getting a bit more of this world because I really did enjoy the series and the themes of it. A lot of people were kind of iffy about the ending, but I really loved it. But that doesn't mean I don't want more. So I definitely want to go ahead and jump into this and hopefully I enjoy it. But like I said, been away from this world a little bit and I don't often do too well with short stories. So a short story collection always intimidates me as well. So the next prompt is, I haven't read this yet because it's new. So I have two books on here. The first one is Babel by R.F. Kuang. This book is intimidating for a plethora of reasons, but it is also relatively new to my shelves. I purchased this knowing that I was not going to read it anytime soon, so I don't feel too bad about not having read it. This book deals heavily with translation and academia and colonization. And I've heard nothing but wonderful things about this, so there is a lot of hype around this book as well. It's a chonker. It's probably gonna be a pretty dense read as well. Like I said, I'm probably not gonna read it probably even anytime this year, but it is a book that I hope to get to eventually because it is definitely a topic that intrigues me. Just for now, the topic and the themes of the story are just a little too intimidating for me, and I need to build up a little bit of courage before I get to it. The next book we have is actually an anthology that's connected to a series that I really enjoyed, and that is Gleanings by Neil Shusterman. I believe they said, I've heard a few people say that there's actually other authors that write a few stories in here. But this builds off of the Scythe series, which I read a few years ago and really enjoyed. I'm a little worried that I've been away from this world too long. I think I read Toll back in 2021, so it hasn't like really been that long, but you know, still long enough for me to maybe not be able to recognize the world as much or the characters as much. But I'm still really excited to be getting a bit more of this world because I really did enjoy the series and the themes of it. A lot of people were kind of iffy about the ending, but I really loved it. But that doesn't mean I don't want more. So I definitely want to go ahead and jump into this and hopefully I enjoy it. But like I said, been away from this world a little bit and I don't often do too well with short stories. So a short story collection always intimidates me as well. All right, next prompt is you have a book from an author whose previous work you have not enjoyed. And at first I thought I didn't have someone like this because I was like, why would I buy a book from an author I didn't like? But alas, I do have two books from the same series, and that is Anne Rice, Interview with a Vampire, and I believe Prince Lestat is the second book. A few years ago, I tried one of her erotica, I think it was, like some Sleeping Beauty-esque story, and I DNF'd it after, I would say maybe like 10 pages, if even that many, because it was super rapey. I don't know how else to put it. It was definitely not my vibe at all. I do occasionally enjoy like consensual non-consent themes, but seeing as this person was 100% asleep and unable to consent in any way, it was just straight up rape in my opinion. And I did not approve of that and was not going to continue reading that. However, this is like a classic. It's well beloved, hopefully not as problematic, and I want to go ahead and give it a try. I did watch the movie for the first time, I think, last year, and my mom said that the book is a lot better, as it usually is. So I am gonna go ahead and give this a try, and this was cheap, so I figured I'd just pick up the second one since I found it. Next prompt is you haven't read it just because you haven't really been in the mood. And I have two books for this. The first one is The Push by Ashley Audran. I bought this book for a specific vlog idea, and I have another book on my shelf that I wanted to read it with. But for some reason, I just haven't been in the mood to read this type of story. We're following a mother who recently had a baby and is having trouble connecting with it, and it takes kind of a sinister turn. I'm assuming it's slightly thrillerish. It sounds super interesting, and this has been on people's top book of the year list quite a few times, so I just know that it's going to be a really interesting read, but it also sounds like it might be slightly frustrating, slightly uncomfortable, and I haven't quite been ready to take on this topic yet. The next one is a chonker. It's one of the longest books on my shelf, one of the few that is over 500 pages actually, and that is The Heart's Invisible Furies by John Boyne. This is a book that I got quite a long time ago for Book of the Month, obviously. It's a queer historical book, and I honestly at this point don't know much else about it, but because it's so thick and it's historical, which is not a genre I am often drawn to, I just haven't been in the mood to pick it up. I know that this is going to take me quite a while to get through. I also have a feeling that it's going to be a bit of a tough read, probably going to be rather depressing, and I just haven't been in the mood to go through a long historical depressing story. But I did put it on my list of 20 books to read in 2023, so I'm optimistic that I'll actually get around to it this year. And then we have the prompt of I'm not reading this book right now because it's huge. And I have one book for that, and that is The Sword of Kagan by M.L. Wang. And this is probably one of the longest books on my shelf at a little bit over 600 pages. I don't read a ton of tomes, so I'm not very used to reading large books like this. Also not super used to reading a standalone fantasy that's a high fantasy like this, so I'm a little intimidated by the amount of world building that's going to be occurring in this. It seems like we also follow multiple points of view, and I just feel like there's going to be a ton going on, and the text is tiny. So I've also heard wonderful things about this story. At this point, I don't know much about what's going to be going on in this book because I've had it on my shelf for so long, but yeah, I've heard wonderful things about it. It seems like it has some really likable characters in it, and that it's a really interesting plot, so I'm excited to get to it. Just a little scared. The second to last prompt is a book that you bought for the cover, but you have since heard not the greatest reviews for this. So I have one book, and I wouldn't say I 100% bought it because of the cover. Now I did see a lot of beautiful special editions of this story coming out, and it is actually the reason that I got Book of the Month. But then people started like actually reading the story, and I was hearing a lot of mixed reviews. There's a ton of people that absolutely love this story, but there's also a lot of people that were very disappointed by that, and that is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. I've never read anything from this author before. I've heard great things about her. I've heard not great things about her. I've heard that they like some books and not others because she always seems to write in a slightly different way. This book seems to be a book that focuses more on very beautiful writing. We're following a girl that has been cursed to be forgotten every time she is out of sight, and follow her over the course of a few hundred years. I have to admit, this sounds like it might, if if it doesn't click with me, might be slightly on the boring side, to be honest. So that's one of the reasons I've really been struggling to pick it up. I also, some of the things people have been saying about it that cause them not to like it that much is that it's very white centric, considering someone who has been living so long. And I guess she does a lot of traveling and stuff, but we still spend a lot of time very centered in Europe. And that's very much through a white person's gaze and things like that. And I can definitely see how those are flaws in a story and have kind of turned me off from it. But, you know, I own the book and I do want to give this author a try. So I do think I will go ahead and eventually read it. But every time I think about doing it, I just get a little scared and back out of it. And the last prompt is, what is the most intimidating book on your shelf? I had two that I was kind of going in between, so I figured I'd mention them both. The first is The Atlas Six by Olivia Blake. I believe that's how you say their name. And this is a pretty popular dark academia story. I really have zero experience with dark academia. I don't think I've really read any books that could fall under that category. So whenever I think about going into one, I get very nervous. I don't consider myself a highly academic person or someone who knows a lot about academics. I did my college online, so I don't really even know the, you know, college experience or anything. So books like this always make me feel like I'm gonna flounder a little bit. I've also heard some mixed reviews about the story. It's also relatively short with a lot of characters in it, and sometimes it gets a little hard for me to keep tracks of so many new characters being introduced. And then we'll be doing a lot of world building. So I feel like it's just gonna be a lot in one little book, and that does scare me a little bit, to be honest. And the last book I want to mention is Kaiki by Vaishnavi Patel. This is a book I've heard really great things about, but it seems to be based on a mythology within a culture that I'm not very familiar with, which can be a little intimidating because sometimes you it just takes a little longer to get immersed in the story and to fully understand kind of like what's going on. I do enjoy reading books from other cultures, and I don't always find it an intimidating experience, but since this one seems to be based kind of on myth, those can get very complex. And sometimes you go into a book feeling like maybe you should know something, at least the basics of the myth. So maybe I'll take a look and see if I can find anything about this person. If it's someone if the author made up, then I feel even dumber because I'm assuming that this is a real person from history or from the myths. But yeah, it's also a thicker story. It's from an author I've never read before. It's a well-hyped and loved book. And it seems to be somewhat historical and somewhat literary, and those are two genres that I don't often lean towards, but it does also seem to have fantasy elements in it, which makes me feel a little bit more comfortable. It's just about me really being able to getting settled in this story and getting the most out of it that I'm worried about. But definitely excited to give it a try. Like I said, tons of great reviews for it, and the concept sounds incredibly interesting. All right, guys, so those are some of the books I'm most intimidated about. Sorry, I didn't really go into any synopsis for the books. I don't know the synopsis of the books that well. Oftentimes when I buy a book and it's on my shelf, if I haven't heard about it on like BookTube for a while, then the synopsis kind of like disappears out of my head. But I know that these are all books that I was interested in, and that they're books that I'm very excited to get to, but that I have been putting off reading them for a little while just because they scare me a little bit. But I'd love to know what some books are that you are really intimidated to read, and if there's something that you do to kind of help yourself pick up those books that you have been avoiding for some time. But thank you guys as always for supporting my channel by watching my videos, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!